Yeah, we don't really have anything outside of just, do you want to update on kind of just a few things?
If you would, please.
Okay. Right now, I'd say we've been spending a lot of time in the cemetery, not some of us more than others. But it's been a really exciting project where Selena and Courtney have been, Selena, they went through and they GPS'd all the sites. And then we had ground penetrating radar come back the week after. And that way we can kind of do some layers of figuring out the markings. And they take pictures. And so it's just in the development of doing, of creating, ultimately it will come out as a public site for the cemetery where you can get on there, you can see where people are buried, you can search, you can pull up obituaries, and just a really, I think, a very useful tool for our community. Mm-hmm. And so that's been, that's a pretty big deal. So they're going to do all the back work this winter on that, and then right now they're helping out, they're doing tool testing right now to give to Public Works and utility. Eventually like Harbor, Parks and Rec, so that way they can have like GIS tools out in the field and they can pull up as-built as you're standing over that portion of the city. Mm. So I think that's kind of our big push right now. And just working with administration to develop legislative priority documents, because that season's coming up here, and then budget, that kind of fun stuff. So.
Yeah, I saw the city council last night.
Mm-hmm.
Meeting for their discussions on that.
Yep.
So it looks like tonight we're going to be definitions and lodging, land use is allowed, land use is at the table, and the short-term regulations. Mm-hmm. So that's 4 major bullet areas. So we'll try to endeavor to get through. Yeah.
So yeah, and kind of like the goal for us tonight is we want to come back to. We've had 2 work sessions. We had one on June 21st, one on July 19th, and our desired outcome would be from tonight. Would be to get feedback and kind of desired fine-tuning before bringing it back to you at a regular meeting. And then obviously at that regular meeting would be a public hearing, and then it would go to council, and council would get to kind of vet whatever this commission produces. And you know, so ultimately it could be implemented at the beginning of next year, of 2023. So, but just to kind of reiterate, the feedback that we've kind of got so far from the community and from you guys is that we want to develop something that will protect future development in residential areas, protect current single-family homes from being converted into short-term rentals, allow residents to continue to make money on their property as traditional bed and breakfasts, but also allow current businesses that are in like the short-term business to continue to operate and sell their property as a short-term rental business in the future, so that it retains that value. You know, we were kind of guided that there was some negatives and downsides to having a specific cap, number-wise, but something that's also simple and easy to understand. So, and yeah, we're just trying to find a balance, because we do realize that short-term rentals do play a role in our community and our economy, but also want to kind of making sure we do have a certain level of span of control over them, so that we don't get bought up by outside entities. So kind of what we're going to do is, Courtney's the one that kind of went through and developed the language, and so I'd like to be able to kind of let Courtney walk you guys through kind of the entire, what the language kind of looks like, and it's pretty simple before you guys, and that way you guys can ask questions, but maybe hold off to have public questions till the end when she's kind of gone through everything, as she might answer questions at the end.
Oh, that'll be good, because it keeps us on track until the tail end.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so we did have, last meeting we had kind of produced that document that was just kind of a summary of like the effects of proposed short-term regulations, and then she has another just as a code key for some who may not be as familiar, that will helpful as we look at the land use table. And just know too that we have actually run all of these by the city attorney, just to be like, hey, this is kind of what we're looking at in general broad terms. Do you see any problems? And there were not any problems with that. And that is a requirement for any type of like Title 15 changes, is attorney review. So Yeah, I'll have Courtney kind of walk you guys through things.
Okay, so the first changes would be to definitions. If you turn to page 8 and 9, in the definition of lodging, currently in city code, it includes the sentence that lodging would be the use includes the providing of meals to overnight guests only. This use includes bed and breakfast, but does not include motel, hotel, or hostel. We struck that since it's more specific to, bed and breakfast, and bed and breakfast covers that in bullet or section A. So lodging, the definition for lodging would just be that first sentence there. The renting out of a dwelling or portion thereof to provide overnight sleeping accommodations for a period of less than 30 consecutive days. And then we added the definition for a short-term rental, since none of the subcategories of lodging really described what short-term rentals are. So the short-term rental definition would be a dwelling unit or a portion thereof that is offered or provided to a guest for compensation for a period of 30 consecutive days or less. Short-term rental units may be whole house rentals, apartments, condominiums, efficiency apartments, or individual rooms and homes. So that would be the only changes to definitions currently. The land uses allowed changes are on page 17 to 18. The current code, numbers 4 and 5, kind of confusing, so we've cleaned that up a little bit, striking 5, and then defining more clearly within principally residential districts, which would be RR, R1, R2, R3, and UR. Lodging would be limited to a home occupation within an owner-occupied dwelling, which is the owner's principal place of residence, and to the rental of not more than 50% of the bedrooms, to a maximum of 5.
That's sort of similar with number 8. I see that sort of, except for the zoning itself, but the language is very much the same. So was that done deliberately for that, or is that just, you just want to separate them out completely like that? So?
Yeah, so the main difference is that number 4 focuses on the residential districts, and then all types of dwelling units. It just says lodging is limited to home occupation, so it would be any, single family or multifamily dwellings, where number 8 just focuses on single family residences within the commercial district.
Okay.
So that's the difference.
Yeah.
But then, number 6 then clarifies that within the principally residential districts of R2, R3, and UR, multifamily dwellings used for lodging purposes are limited to home occupation within one of the units of the owner-occupied dwelling. So what this would imply is if you had a duplex, the owner of that duplex would need to live in one of the units and could rent out the other unit entirely.
Okay.
Or if you had triplex, live in one, rent out the other 2.
Now I have a question, and I'll let you go the way through, because I'm going against what you just said, but okay, I'll go then later.
Okay, and then, just clarifying then with number 7, that in principally commercial districts, OR, AC, HC, and CB, lodging is limited to the rental of not more than 5 guest bedrooms. So that doesn't really change much from the current code, except just clarifying that the zoning districts that's in. And then number 8 specifically focuses on the single family residence. So within principally commercial districts, OR, AC, HC, and CB, lodging within a single family residence is limited to home occupation within an owner occupied dwelling, which is the owner's principal place of residence, and to the rental of not more than 50% of the bedrooms, to a maximum of 5. And then 10 says within principally commercial districts, multifamily dwellings used for lodging purposes are not required to be the business or property owner's residence. So within commercial districts, any multifamily dwelling, duplex, triplex, fourplex, can be rented out entirely. The owner doesn't need to live in any of the units.
And that's primarily because it's non-residential areas. That was the logic behind that.
Right. Then 14 will require proof of insurance from all business owners. 15 specifies the fee that will be required for an owner-occupied short-term rental. So those would be someone just renting out a room in their house would pay a $50 permit fee. And number 16 would be the permit fee for non-owner occupied short-term rentals. So those would be anyone renting out an entire unit. So that could be a whole house, and that individual would need to pay a $100 permit fee, or that could be an individual that has multiple little apartments. Each of those apartments would need to have a separate permit. So the fee would be associated with, you know, the renting listing. So if you have a separate unit that's being listed, then you need to get a permit and pay a fee for that.
For each one, even though it's under the one, although they may all be under one roof.
Right,
If they're separate, they're gonna have their own individual permit fee.
right.
But if it's the whole house itself, it's just one.
And the reason to have separate permits for each listing is really just a matter of organization and structure for us, because it just gets way too confusing and disorganized when there's multiple listings and rentable units under one permit. So we need to just have each of those separate listings with their own permit. Those were the only changes there for land uses allowed. Now go to the land uses allowed table 27 to 29. So currently within City Code, the land uses allowed table, it has house rental on a nightly basis as not being allowed in RR, R1, or R2, and then permitted in the rest of the districts. We're just going to strike that because we want to, for organization, we want to keep all of the lodging places within the land use table under lodging. So on page 28, we would add lodging, short-term rental, single-family dwelling. The H stands for home occupation, P stands for permit. So in all zoning districts, a single-family dwelling needs to be owner-occupied, which is the home occupation, and have a permit. Then lodging, short-term rental, multifamily dwelling would not be allowed in RR and R1 because you can't have a multifamily dwelling in those zoning districts anyway. But then in R2, R3, UR, they would be required to have the home occupation. And in the business, in the principally commercial districts, they would just need the permit. Then lodging, short-term rental, non-owner occupied would be allowed just with permit in the principally commercial districts. So that one would encompass, you know, apartments, townhomes, condominiums, the other types of dwelling units that aren't single-family and multifamily.
Yeah.
And then on page 29, we just struck the lodging, multifamily dwelling apartment, just because we moved it on to the other page and clarified some of the home occupation stuff. I think those are all the changes.
And just to also clarify, so this is just for, this is kind of like a point in time that these would go in place, but everyone that's been operating as a short-term rental before would just continue to do so. So this is more like for people that are being introduced. And so the way that code normally works is if you've been allowed to do something, it's just called a non-conforming use. And that would just go on in perpetuity, and so they can sell their property. But the way that kind of non-conforming uses work is that if they ever choose to like not do it anymore, then that would go away. So, but as long as that's operating as a property that can be sold as a short-term rental property, the investment value stays there, unless someone at some point in time, the owner would choose to be like, hey, I'm not going to do this anymore with this property, and it would go away. So.
Commissioners, do you have any questions at this point? I have on page, I think it's page 7, it's paragraph 7 or 8, and I think it's that the one where you made all the changes back, I think on, I give it like 17. I think it's,
Yeah, I believe it is 17.
I think it's 17, but paragraph 7 and 8, I just want to clarify. Oops, there it is. Okay, 7, window. So, yeah, on number 7, and I just want to clarify this, is this also required to be the owner's residence at all in there, or not? It's the
Number
says that-
7?
Yeah, with principally commercial districts, lodges limited to the rental of not more than 5 guests, but regardless of building or business ownership. Would there have to be somebody there, a manager or an owner on those at that time?
No.
Okay. Right, on that. And then, home occupation. Okay, then I've answered my question for number 8 then, for that, as far as, because you already have that in their home occupation, so that has to be with that. And then I think one other one that I have here in the,
Something on 10 first.
sorry?
I want to mention something on 10.
Oh, go ahead.
On number 10,
Yeah.
can we make sure that the M on multifamily isn't bolded
Yes.
and underlined like the rest of everything? Okay, sorry, go ahead.
No worries. Scroll to my other one
And I
here.
think when I was going through, I missed number 11. So to explain that, in the principally commercial districts, an individual must wait 4 years after purchasing a multifamily dwelling before acquiring the non-owner occupied short-term rental permit. And the reason for this is we're trying to preserve as many dwelling units that are currently in the commercial districts and that are being used for residential purposes.
Right.
The majority of buildings are single-family dwellings. There are a few multifamily dwellings, which is why we focus primarily on limiting single-family dwellings to being owner-occupied, but then putting this 4-year wait on multifamily dwellings to provide at least a time period for individuals who are currently living in these structures, if they were to be bought up, to not just be kicked out the next month and be homeless trying to find a place to stay, that they would at least have, 4 years, whatever, to continue and find another place to live before it got turned into a short-term rental.
I understand that, yeah, that makes good sense. The other thing too is I've had some folks touch base with me about people who own single-family rentals or single-family places in these districts. And they're saying, well, what if, I'm not doing it as a short-term rental or anything else at this point in time, but I already own it. Do I have to wait the 4 years?
If they own a multifamily dwelling or
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's multifamily dwelling.
yeah, if they already own it, then they can,
They don't have to worry about waiting the 4 years for that?
Right.
Okay, yeah, because if it's not being used necessarily for lodging or anything else like this, but other than multifamily, they want to transition to it, would they have to wait?
no, yeah, if they currently own it, then they could transition to short-term rental.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's also to kind of help curb speculation buying for.
Right.
Mm-hmm, that
Yeah.
Was there a reason for the 4 year?
I
Just
think when we discussed it, it was, because I think we had kind of conversations off and on, but they said if you did like 1 year, I mean, if people are really interested in investing in Seward, like 2 years, that there's a land speculation that like, we felt like if 4 years, you're really going to be invested in the community and be willing to wait and that type of thing, where we thought that 1 year or 2 year would speculators can wait and then they can just dump it and go. And so we thought that would kind of create, that might be a time that would have a good enough buffer.
create a sense of permanence, perhaps.
Yep. And then we would always get 4 years of long-term rentals out of it that way, technically, so.
Yeah.
I seen on 16 used page 18 on 16 says non-owner occupied short-term rentals will be required to pay the $100 permit fee. So it would make me wonder if I had multiple houses with 3 or 4 in each house, 3 or 4 rental units in each house, would I have to do 12 different applications? Or would I be able to, since I'm the single owner, could I put, I guess, units 1 through 8 in this one and 1 through 7 through this one, and just do like the 2 applications since it's one owner occupied, or one owner property that's being done? Or wouldn't they have to fill out multiple applications, I guess? Because I know several people around here that have lots of units that that's mainly their income. Would they have to fill out a separate application for each one of their units?
I
Or
think
would they
that
be able to conjoin them?
traditionally our short-term rental registration process has been excruciating at best. But we are working towards making it online and better, so like that would carry over from year to year. And so I think a portion of that, the answer would be like a portion of that, you could fill out, here's my name, I own these. But then there's probably gonna have to be a little bit of like, because you have to have a life safety inspection for each one, and some of these other things. And so we're actually just developing that right now to make it online, stuff that carries over every year, so you don't have to fill it out. And so I would say the answer is gonna be, there's gonna be some portions that you have to fill out for each one, like life safety stuff. Then that would be a fee associated with each one of those. But then kind of your main application, we don't want people filling out the same paperwork for no
Over and
reason,
over.
like 8 times just because you have 8 units.
Okay.
So,
Well, it makes sense, to have, if you have multiple homes, each home has its own permit and inspection and fee.
Yes.
But there's not a separate inspection and fee for each unit within the home.
No, just the,
Yeah, that's the thing
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I thought you said if you're having your advertising or renting them separately, they have their own separate, identifier, so to speak, and they rented, each one of those would have its own permit and inspection. You have, for the $100 permit or whatever, and then they have its own inspections throughout. That's my understanding.
yeah, so I mean, you gotta think for each separate listing. So if an individual has a home and they're renting out each bedroom as a separate listing, then they would need to get a separate permit. I don't know how many instances we have of those, but typically most of the separate units are like self-contained, they have their separate entrance. Usually if it's a home with bedrooms all attached, then it would be just one listing on
Okay.
Airbnb typically.
Okay.
and that fee schedule is fairly low compared to when we did research as far as around the United States, what fees were. And so our fees are pretty, for an annual permit, that's actually extremely like on the low end of things, so,
And that's annually?
yes.
Yeah. Well, fees make sense. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into
Yes,
paperwork,
there's a lot of
inspections.
work that we do behind the scenes.
And,
with that, so, yeah.
that time shouldn't be paid by the taxpayers. It should be paid by the people actually making money off of that.
When we're talking about 16, I just have a nitpick that it shouldn't have an apostrophe, I believe.
See that?
That it should not have an apostrophe.
On which, where at?
On its,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Thank you. That's good.
It is.
We like that.
Nice.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioners, have anything else to offer right now? Offer it to the floor. Anybody have any questions or concerns?
I'll correct my one quick little nitpick. On page 17, you go from number 8 to 10, you're missing 9, which then would change all your numbers.
okay.
There's no number 5?
They got rid of number 5. So it goes from 4 to 6.
Oh, yeah.
So all the
All numbers all gonna be off.
I'm sure they'll do an administrative numbering it again.
Yeah.
I have a few questions about page 17, since that's what we were talking about. So, I'm curious, number 6, in principally residential districts, multifamily dwellings used for lodging purposes. limited to a home occupation within one of the units of the owner-occupied dwelling. And you guys probably know uses better than I do, but I believe you're allowed to do like types of offices and some types of businesses in UR. Right? So it just seems like, what if somebody had something that was zoned UR and they utilized a portion of it not to live in, but as their primary, like their personal place of business? Do you know what I mean? It just seems to me like if a use of UR is to allow some commercial uses, then if they aren't living there, but they're utilizing it as their business, what they should be able to do. It just seems more fair, like, because UR is one of those mixed of kind of commercial and kind of residential codes, and you're really making it very residentially limiting there. Whereas maybe somebody wants that property because they have a small, like, printing business that they want to operate, so they bought that property with those rentals. Is that?
You can still run businesses and it's refers to lodging only. Is that my
I
understanding?
guess mean like what you're saying is that you can't do the lodging purposes unless you home occupy one of the units. And I'm just saying, what if it's like home or business occupied instead of just home occupied?
So like they had an office there and then we're doing nightly rentals with apartments in it,
Yeah,
right?
because it's urban residential,
Right.
and like they might not
Very
choose to
mixed
live
use.
there, but they might have bought that property in order to run business.
But they're there for part of the time, which is good because they're working
Yeah.
there.
But it's a home, not a commercial building.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, UR has a mix of uses.
Yeah, I'm just saying you're
But it
talking
is
about
residential.
homes and commercial buildings in UR, not
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
okay.
And
Anyway, just a thought, and then I'm a little confused on number 7 as compared to number 10. So number 7, I'm just a little, are we saying primarily residential? Because this is saying 5 guest bedrooms, and I'm just not sure it's different between 7 and 10 with 5 apartments, and number 7 with 5 guest bedrooms. If you kind of missing something there, like what the real difference is between those two statements. I mean, because number 10, the only real difference I think is that it says multifamily, but number 7 does not specify single family.
Well, 7 says bedrooms and 10 says
Right,
apartments.
no, I get that.
Yeah.
But there's,
so
but if
so to explain, number 7 is like the broad, within principally commercial districts, lodging in general is limited to the rental of not more than 5 guest bedrooms, because if you go over 5, then you're a hotel or motel. So then it goes, number 8 then goes more specific that within principally commercial districts, single family residence is limited to home occupation. Then number, was it, sorry, 10.
The new 10.
10, then because it's a multifamily dwelling, you could have, I mean, we don't have a lot of them, but you could have a 5-plex or a 6-plex or a 7-plex. So this is carried over from what our current code says, but that's just saying that if you are renting out a multifamily dwelling, that's like a 6-plex or 7-plex or whatever 10-plex, that you couldn't rent out more than 5 of those apartment units. So that's
I
something
guess
that could be changed.
okay, I guess it's just a little confusing. If 10 is not a subset of 7, then it's like number 6. So I own a property that is zoned OR. I have an office in 1 and 3 apartments. And when I read number 7, to me it would, I mean, if I'm just reading that, within principally commercial districts, which is me, lodging is limited to the rental of not more than 5 guest bedrooms. But I have more than 5 guest bedrooms, you know, but, so that's confusing because then 7 is equal to 10. You know,
So
you guys
it's-
understand how you're writing this, but when we see changeover and city administration and enforcement, some people choose to enforce things exactly the way they're written, and in weird ways that you wouldn't predict that they
So would it
try.
make more sense in 7 to say, lodging within a dwelling unit is limited?
Within a single family dwelling, or within a
Within, yeah, like just a dwelling.
unit,
So a
yeah.
dwelling unit would be, yeah,
An apartment
any
or-
contained unit that, yeah, that,
Yeah, that makes more sense to me, because otherwise they don't really work together very well. I think
Yeah.
what you're saying is the point you're trying to make with 7. I think it just, to me, no, not somebody who's great at interpreting these things, I'd be like, ooh, what does that mean?
right?
I think specificity on that as far as whether it's the apartment or dwelling, when you just say lodging, that encompasses a lot. Perhaps, maybe if you narrow it down in scope to the specific thing that she was maybe referring to, like her example, it might help tidy it
Yeah.
up.
Yeah,
I know.
that's helpful.
Language for these things seems to be, can be your real Achilles heel if
Yeah.
you don't have it right down.
And examples are like that are really helpful too for us to understand, like, oh, okay, that's how it sits on that. So I appreciate that.
Somebody else have any questions?
I'm confused about the not being able to rent a place out for 4 years after a purchase or a change, I guess that's what it was, after a purchase?
Change of ownership.
A new,
Because in my mind, I'm thinking somebody buys a place, gives those tenants notice that when their lease is up, they're asking them to find a new place to live because their lease is now expired. Does that mean that that owner, if they find a place and they move, they can't rent that out nightly or whatever they choose to do with their building within the, is that what that means? They gotta wait 4 years before they can rent that place out on a nightly basis? Why would you overstep like that? I don't understand that.
well, if my understanding, if you sold it, you're selling it and you're selling it in the same capacity, then it carries forward in the same manner. Or maybe I'm
You're selling it
misunderstanding.
to a new buyer.
Right, exactly, but you're selling it as that same business. They purchase it as a
Okay.
whatever lodging kind of thing. So that could carry through, but if it's something a new property of some sort and somebody buys it, then it's the 4 years, is that?
Well, the other thing I heard said up there was being concerned about speculators purchasing and, well, what if you aren't a speculator, you're a resident of Seward and you've lived in another house and you've grown up here and you bought a property, you're not a speculator, you're gonna be here, you're buying it for business reasons, why do you now have to wait 4 years because somebody from out of state may have bought it? I mean, you're holding people that are invested here, know what they're trying to build or buy.
We're trying to slow down the conversion of long-term rentals into short-term rentals, because that's not a good, speedy conversion of those types of properties to short-term rentals is not good for the community.
There's also been a lot of talk about too many nightly rentals becoming nightly rentals from long-term rentals. And so I understand that this is kind of a way to, every time we have a meeting about housing, everybody says, we don't have enough, there's too many long-term rentals are being lost to various things. And we've been asked by council to kind of put something together to curtail that a little bit, since it's a large problem.
But it's not gonna be solved in the city limits and just in this short little blocks of area, so
Well, my concern too is when you put, as a owner of a commercial property, in the commercial zone is what I guess I'm trying to say, this stuff is important, I'm still learning all this. It seems odd if you're in a commercial zone, I guess I could understand if it's these residential areas and things, but when I bought a property that it was zoned to do anything I want to do in it, and I'm like, that's mine, and I own that, and that's how I bought it, and zone that, and now these other things are getting put in. Just Vic, when you said something that maybe I've heard differently in some side conversations, that if I have this home, and then I choose to sell it down the road, whoever buys it now cannot run it as a nightly rental, or are you saying they can run it?
If you're running it as a nightly rental, you can continue to run it as a nightly rental, and you can sell it as a nightly rental.
Okay.
As long as you're continuing, as long as that operation is continuing.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right, that's good too.
Yeah, because we want to value people's investment.
Yeah, and that, I guess that's the other thing, that whole idea of it being a commercial zone, if it was zoned open, wide open, you can do,
Yeah, it's just an interesting thing. It's like, yeah, I could place a stranger into a commercial zone and they'd say, tell me what zone this is, and they'd be like, well, it's residential, there's houses all around me. And so it's also that kind of
Right, but as somebody who's making those purchases, when people are buying things, that's something you are aware of. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
And something interesting to note to me for everyone, especially the commissioners, you know, we need to adapt and modify code to fit the needs of the community, and you know, who could have foreseen 10 years ago or however long ago when short-term rentals started picking up the pace, what they would become today. So, but just an interesting note, lodging for hotel, motel, lodge, or an inn in the land use allowed table is only allowed outright in the auto commercial district. And then in 3 other districts, you have to get a conditional use permit. And those would be in our 3, harbor commercial and central business. So it is, you know, according to historically what the community saw as, you know, where tourists would stay in a hotel or motel was pretty limited. With short-term rentals, it's become very broad. So it's, you know, kind of a need to rein that in a little bit, and it's not too radical, I guess, to kind of limit that more in the commercial areas, because hotel and motel, lodge and inn are already pretty restrictive in the commercial district even.
I remember back years ago, we used to have a bed and breakfast, and we were in office residential. We had to go through all the hoops and all the rest of that stuff. But there was no authorization for lodgings in R1s at all. And that was, you know, that got cracked open probably about 20 years ago maybe, and then it started to ravel from there. And it creates a bit of a challenge for some of the people in the residential areas, primarily because they buy these homes and then they realize their neighbors have a bed and breakfast that is just rotating people through, which for some of them creates a bit of a challenge. Yeah. So it has opened up some.
Jason, you was talking about, when she was asking about the commercial continuing on as it was. So if somebody owns a commercial building that is just vacant and empty, they bought the vacant building and they haven't done nothing with it. So if the next buyers buy it, can they do it as a short-term rental also? Or let's just say that's what their purpose is of buying it and doing
It's not a
something.
single-family structure.
But you was just saying that the wording was you continue on as it was, but if it wasn't
Yeah,
being
well,
utilized.
as far as if you're an existing short-term rental, you can continue on, that property can continue on as a short-term rental in perpetuity, as long as it continues on as a short-term rental.
Okay, but if it
Yeah,
wasn't being used as a short-term rental prior.
If it's not, and so that's the thing, yeah, I don't want to like, make it sound like, so yeah, there's properties here that, under this code, in commercial districts, that you could buy and turn into short-term rentals. So it's just gonna be like if you have a commercial property and they have like these rooms, like in one of the buildings, like downtown, and you know, there's lots of rooms. The only one that I can think of in my mind is Matt Hershock's place, where it's got like sourdough lodging, where it's got an older building, lots of rooms, and if someone were to come in and buy that, they could totally turn that into short-term rentals. That's like, but that's allowed by this, because we feel that's an appropriate use, and it's not. That's actually preferred development for short-term rentals, I would say. At least you're taking a building and you're putting it new and you're putting it to good use that way. And so, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I just want to make sure it didn't limit the
No.
purpose of, like, if there wasn't being used as short-term rental, then it would not be able to go into that.
No. Yeah.
I have a question and a concern. The first one, the question, I have a single-family home, which I do one-room short-term rental right now, and I live there. But say, for example, a couple years ago, when I feel like I'm gonna go travel for a year or two someplace, and I wanna rent out my whole house, does that mean I'm not allowed to do that?
Are you going to do it for long-term?
I don't know. I just wanna know what my options are
Yeah.
and my own properties that I bought and paid for.
What zone are you in?
I think it's urban residential.
Yeah, that's one of those flop zones, kind of like, because right now, if you live in certain, like, if you live in rural residential, R1 or R2, it's like you can't do whole house rentals no matter what. So there's already like zones where whole house rentals are not allowed at all. So, but a UR is one of the zones that would flip that way. That would make it so it has to be owner occupied, so.
So does that mean if I was gone and I was actually living in the house at the time, I can't rent out my house for a period of time if I want to.
If you're renting it long-term, I don't see why there'd be a problem with that, but who would
That's
manage it?
short-term.
Short-term?
Yeah, the short term would not be allowed.
So you're giving up residence out of there, moving out completely, or are you just traveling and keeping it as your
I
residence?
still own my house, but I might want to rent it for a
Well,
long
it's
time.
still your residence, then still kind of
But
there.
also, don't you already do night lease, right? So does this fall under the rule of like a continuation of that? It's just the whole house instead of one room? Under the rules in the beginning?
That could be a possibility, like, yeah. I mean, that could be a possibility that way.
Because you're already using it.
Right.
It's a B&B.
All right, I just, yeah, so I'm, you know, I might be grandfathered in some ways. At the same time, I feel like if somebody's bought their house and paid for it, and they want to rent their house out, why shouldn't they be able to do that? That just seems kind of like a lot to tell somebody they're not allowed to do with their own property.
Well, when you buy a house in the city, it's within the city limits. By purchasing that house, you kind of adopt all the code regulations that go with it, you know? And so you could have a neighbor across the street that's owned R1, like in different spots that, we have people that live right next to each other, there's spot zoning for UR. People that are neighbors, one can do one thing and one can't, just because that was the regulations that came with their home, so.
The other thing that I want to bring up is a concern, even though I'm on the Historic Preservation Commission, I'm speaking as a private citizen, I do have concerns that we've got a lot of cool historic houses, single-family houses in town. And I worry that some people might be like, well, I'd like to have a rental or do something business-wise with that property. But if I have a choice of like, well, I'm not allowed to do that. And so I can tear that place down and build something else like a duplex or something else where I could do that. Then we could move some of our historic properties because people want to have some kind of a business and they have no option to do that with the property that they have. And I hate to see that happen because I feel like it has a big effect on the character of our town. And I know as a business owner myself, it attracts people to this town. So I have a bed and breakfast, people are coming because of the character of Seward. And it's one of the reasons I moved here. So I hate to see us lose that because we're making it so hard for people who might want to maintain those properties to be able to do that. And so they tear them down to do something else.
Yeah, and I would say we're losing the character of our town whether we like it or not. Like we have teachers, the schools can't hire teachers because they get jobs here, but they can't find housing. The schools went a number of teachers short this last year because they do not have, they'll accept the job, great teacher, I can't find a place to live, I'm gonna have to decline the job. And so they're going short, and we're having good families move away because they don't have the services provided here. And so we're kind of also in that declining, that decline also, that we have to take some measures so that we do have good school populations and we do have families that move here. And so it is kind of a tension that works that way.
I understand, and I'm hoping that we all together can come up with some good solutions. But those historic houses, once they're gone, you can't bring them back. We can make changes to make the future better for everybody, but you can't bring old houses back once you tear it down. So that's something to consider. It's too late now.
I'm curious, in this example, or this fear of this losing historic homes, which I think we all love the character of Seward. I don't quite understand, and I think it's just because I'm not personally connected to a situation like this. Are they zoned single family? Because then nobody can tear it down and build a multiplex.
Yeah.
Is it zoned commercial? Because if it is, and it's allowed nightly, those people would actually make more money tearing it down right now and turning it into a nightly, in which case, this going into effect is better for those historic homes. So I'm just not clear on what situation is happening where people would be tearing down historic homes because of this change. I don't see an example of, and maybe someone can explain it to me and then I can understand better why that's clear. But I think honestly, like, if they're zoned commercial and somebody's in it for the money, they're gonna tear that house down right now. and turn it into a multifamily. But if it's zoned single family, they can't do it anyway.
I don't know, I'm not sure all the regulations for the.
Yeah, but and it's like a single
Yeah.
family in a commercial zone would be protected in some ways because you can't convert it because you couldn't tear that down and get a permit just to throw up
I just
a
don't want
multiplex
people's
there.
like fears, like we all care about sewer, like, I mean, we don't want to see these historic homes go, but sometimes I think like there's some people pushing like some ideas of things that could happen, but I'm not really sure how that could happen or why it would happen. And if someone else understands better, would love to.
No, I like what you say, because I think a lot of these scenarios are coming up, or ones or maybe we're not haven't fully, haven't come up, but it's almost like whack-a-mole. There's a lot of what-ifs out there. You just don't know all the time, and so it's good to have the discussion about it and to further, factor it into the code and the rest, so, because not all of us have that experience or background. So I think that's, bringing that up is a good one, but also too, the what-ifs are helpful, but we also know we have to keep the historic part of town, in the strategic plan as well as the comprehensive plan. We're trying to keep the thing going where it's a historic town, we support tourism, and also have, just make it good for the community and all of the people, like Jason was saying, have enough housing for people to make this town survive, because you don't want us to turn into one of those communities that they roll up the sidewalks at the end of the tourist season.
I think that this document doesn't really, I think preserving historic homes is for a different document.
Yeah.
This one is for short-term rentals and this definition.
Just getting a handle on that.
I agree with, we don't want historic homes to be torn down, but I think that's a different document, and maybe to go through the Historic Preservation Board first and then brought back. I don't think it's relevant exactly in this document at this moment, even though it is important. I just think they're two different documents.
I think as both of you were talking, if I can speak to what my confusion with some of this is, there does seem to be some limitations on single family dwellings as compared to a multifamily dwelling, so that it seems like there's more limitations, so that what I'm hearing you say is like, yeah, if I have a single family dwelling, looking specifically at Michael's, gosh, maybe I should have built it as a duplex, because it looks like a duplex has a lot more leeway than a single family home, and maybe I messed myself up by not building it that way, I know I get to be grandfathered in, and I'm very grateful for that. But just kind of thinking in those terms, like someone might say, gosh, I am gonna change this, I'm gonna adjust it right now so that it's not a single family. But I don't know if I'm understanding how it's all worded.
And that's why we're talking about this, because it's good, like for instance, Mary Ann, with her property, we could make an adjustment like that. Well, like with UR, I have a property, I'm currently only doing this form of short-term rental, but if it's currently allowed, could your permit carry over so that for future use in that? That could be something that could be discussed. I mean, that could, I think that's that's not an unreasonable type of thing, and having a continuity to the use available at that time. So I think, but that's why we're talking about these things, and so we can get ideas on that. So, and I mean, honestly, like, I'm the biggest, I'm a big person of I don't like government controls. So I live out of city limits. But at the same time too, I think that we have seen in communities around the United States, if you go do research, where they have been completely destroyed and taken over. Where our attorney, the city attorney, lives in Girdwood, and he's working they are down the road from us, and we don't want to be where they're at. And there's a lot of we have so many great things to offer. We can easily become a resort town that rolls up sidewalks, and that none of us can afford to live in. I had friends that got pushed out of Aspen in Colorado in the 80s because they couldn't even afford property taxes on the home anymore. And so I just want this to be tourism, short-term rentals are valuable. But I also want this to be a place where I want my kids to be able to settle, to be able to buy a property here, a house here. I hope my kids live close to me, good gosh. But right now, I couldn't even afford to buy my own home. I mean, it's like, if I was looking for houses right now, I couldn't afford to buy my own home, and limiting short-term rentals is not the answer. It's just, they are valuable to us, but kind of trying to get our hand around a little piece of it so we don't get land speculated out. Because every time a property goes up, we get call after call after call, can I turn that into a short-term rental? Can I turn that into a short-term rental? And they're not from around here. And so there's a certain amount of protection, and because I care about this community, that we want to have. And I want people who are currently involved in the business to do well. But I also want this to remain Seward that we all know and love, and not be like, yeah, we used to live there. When people could afford to live there, or when normal people could afford to live there. I don't want that story. I want our schools to grow and become, twice, like back to 2000 when they were twice as big as they are now. And when we have better programs for our kids and for our community, and with talk of a rec center, it's like, to justify rec centers, we need more kids and more families and these things. And so I feel like in some ways we need to push the pendulum, try and find ways to kind of capitalize on what we can, but kind of push the pendulum at bay. And so really, like, for me, like, that's kind of maybe I'm speaking out of turn right now, but this is kind of like the heart of the matter for us, is like, how do we maintain the history piece, and the hometown piece, get some more winter tourism going on, get some year-round economy pieces going on, and kind of keep it in balance and make it thrive, without losing it to people from the outside. So.
Jason, if I could add to that, my kids go to the high school, they don't even have a nurse because they have no place to live. Like, there's just,
yep.
You call the school and you say, hey, what's your COVID policy? And they go, we have no idea. We don't have a nurse.
Yep.
That's literally what I heard yesterday
yep.
from the school.
Yep.
We don't know. We don't have a nurse.
I would say the school is one example of, like, people that are, the police department can't hire dispatchers. We can't hire policemen. Policemen are having to live in the little barracks at the fire department until they can try and find something. And so it's like, it's not just schools, but it's a lot of different places throughout town that are trying to find houses to buy or year-round housing.
Yeah.
I recognize that as the major problem, and I'm understanding that, but I want to point out that there's multiple ways to fix that, and one of them is opening up more lots available and plumbing lots that are here in town that people can't build on because there's no electric and no plumbing hookup. And I guess there's a program now where you can get 50% or something. Well, how bad do you want it? Just get it in there, get that plumbing into all those lots, and people will start building. If you're waiting for them to come up with the 50%, they're gonna build the house, which is gonna cost them a whole lot more. So I'm just saying, there's ways, and we're focusing on the people that own the little houses in town. Let's focus on the lots that don't have the plumbing and the electrical hooked up.
And we are.
Yeah,
that's a full swing. We've approved a number of those, and that is going, and it's going to start really going here shortly.
Good.
So,
because I wanted just to point out that there's a lot of pieces, not just these little houses.
Agreed. That is actually the number one. Like the city, we are working really hard with that developer reimbursement program, and utilities are. I had no idea how much it costs to put water and sewer in, even like a short stretch. It is bonkers. Yeah, as you know.
We looked at it 5 years ago, and we're like, well, we can't do that, but we still own this lot that we haven't been able to do anything.
The city does have money that we are trying to prioritize to make the most out of the money that we have for that reimbursement, those reimbursement pieces. And it is our goal to find ways to basically get every lot that we can, get a home on it. And we don't have any control outside of city limits, but we are working with the borough, and we're having conversations with DNR about things like land swaps. There's property out on Old Exit Glacier Road that the borough owns, but so we're trying to help them. Because they're not over here, they don't see properties like we do, and I'm like, so this is borough land, what are you guys doing with this? But like that one out there, when they get the Box Canyon levee rebuilt and really restructured in a couple of years, that will open up a number of properties, and they'll put those out, in a number of years. And so we are working with outside entities, Forest Service, to try and, there is some usable land. The low-hanging fruit is pretty much gone at this point. There's, people talk like, oh, you should just look outside of city limits. I'm like, if it were really easily accessible, it would have been picked up by now. But there are places that are the kind of the next level that we are, as a city, really working actively on to get those freed up, because we want those to be purchased as well, but we don't have any span of control of, like, those could all be bought up by outside entities. And so, but we still feel like it's our role to get, even if we get 20 more lots put on outside of city limits and half of them get bought up by residents, that's still a win for us, right? And so that's what we're working towards. And so we do understand that is part of the solution as well.
I'm in support of this multi-pronged approach, like as far as, putting a cap on nightly rentals. I know it's probably not something you expect a real estate agent to say, but I am in support of a lot of these things. I'm in support of the city opening up land. I know you guys are doing a lot to create housing opportunities for people, and this is just one small piece of the pie. As far as this only affecting, some houses within the downtown area, it's really affecting so much more than that, because what it's affecting is price, right? And like, that's what we're all talking about. Houses are becoming unaffordable because you're getting multiple offers on things that people can do nightly rentals on. So while it might only affect a small amount of houses, those home sales prices affect every future sale on every other home inside and outside of city limits. So while we look at it and think, well, this is a small thing, it's really a big thing as far as home values in general. Because if we have a home come up for sale and it's some single-family residential, like there's one right now, it's going to sell for under list price. Lots of people are looking at it. It's not flying off the market. If that one were zoned to do nightlies, it would be gone right now already. So there's a huge difference in marketability, and therefore the price something sells at, just based on whether it can do nightly rentals or not. So in that sense, I am a fan of this, though I think there's things to work out for sure, and I completely understand some of the concerns. I do want to mention that something I have heard a lot of is people who have a home who do nightlies in that home. So maybe they have a room in that house or something, and they say, well, I make a lot of money on this nightly rental, and I'm worried about the value of my property in the future. It is interesting that you guys are considering allowing the use to continue. I think you're going to get a lot less bite back from the public allowing that. But I do want to point out that it's not really very equitable. So like, imagine that there are these townhomes on 4th Avenue, kitty corner from my business, and they're zoned urban residential. There's 8 of them, the Vista Del Mar townhomes. One of them is doing a nightly rental right now. If all of those go for sale, when these rules go into effect, which one is worth the most? It's the one that's doing nightly rental, right? So you are creating value and passing that on to people that are running it like that way, and that's not really equitable, because that property isn't really worth more. It's just more marketable. You're creating more, like the city is creating more value in that property. So it is what it is. I understand why you're including it, but I just want to be clear that it's not really equitable from a real estate perspective. And the other thing is that you have these people concerned about their homes being worth a different value because they're running nightlies. If you sell your home, it's going to be sold as a residential property. If it's not a big commercial property, it's probably going to be sold residentially, right? You're running nightlies on it. And an appraiser is not going to take into account how much money you're making as a nightly rental. That's just not how they do it. I've sold triplexes that were people were doing nightlies on, but it's not going to be valued based on the nightly rental rate. So if you get people arguing back that the house is going to be worth less, it's actually going to be appraised the exact same way it would be appraised, which is not taking into account the nightly rental rates unless it's a commercial purchase, which 99% of homes in Stewart are not commercial purchases because it's a higher interest rate, higher down payment, and a shorter term. So there's a lot of people who are concerned about it affecting the value of your home, but if you have a home and you're doing a rental out of it, that appraiser is not basing your value off of what your nightly rental is. Does that make sense? Just because I've heard a lot of people say, oh, my house is going to be worth less. I make so much money doing nightlies. Well, good. I'm glad you made money doing nightlies, but it actually doesn't affect the value of your home.
So are you suggesting that we don't do
No, I'm not, I understand, right, they're kind of two separate issues. On one hand, I'm trying to explain that, like, I don't think it's going to decrease the value, it's not going to decrease the value of the majority of homes that are sold in sewer because they're not being sold on a commercial loan. They're being sold on a residential loan based on square footage and long-term rental rates, not nightly rates. Unless it's like a fully commercial building and someone's getting a commercial loan, 30% down, you know, whatever. As far as whether or not you should allow passing on of the ability.
The unconfirmed.
That's not, I understand why you guys are allowing it. I'm just saying that it is, you are creating value in something that really, you're creating marketability, which creates value.
So I'm also a real estate agent, and I totally agree with you
Yeah.
on that.
It's a little bit of a weird thing, but I think that you won't get a pass on rental, like STR caps, if you don't allow that. You know, even though
So you
when
shouldn't
those
allow the
people go to
non-conformed use.
sell, they're not gonna be able to sell based on their nightly rental income. But they're gonna sell faster and better because they have the use allowed. Those are just some points I wanted to bring up.
Well, no one can afford interest right now anyway, right?
Right, I just did the math on it, a $350,000 home with 5% down and 7% interest on a 30-year loan, which is what most people would get. It's gonna cost somebody $31.50 a month with utilities, and if it's a third of their income, they have to make $142,000 and take home $126 after taxes in order to afford a $350,000 home.
Yeah, it's not what we want. We want people to, we want starter families to be able to come here and afford to live.
They can have a VA.
Well, interest rates can't get you.
Interest rates. How much, just out of curiosity, how much more usually, I know commercial loans have different, where you do have to put like more down and that type of thing, but how much are the interest rates normally for commercial loans versus?
I see some, it just depends on the bank and it depends on a lot of different things, but I'd say at least 2% higher.
Okay.
When home rates were at 3.5%, the business rates at that time were at 5.5%.
Yeah, and the other thing, like the kind of the double-edged sword of like looking at how do we, because if we did like an actual cap, we were afraid of like the thing too of creating this commodity of like they did with commercial halibut permits of like, yeah, here you guys have this $3,000 permit, and then like a couple years later they're like $80,000, and so it's of a commodity that's also becomes this other beast in and of itself.
It wouldn't be surprising because that townhouse scenario, so say that person who's doing the nightly rental goes to transfer it after all these rules go into effect, and their townhouse is selling for more because they're allowed to pass this on. An appraiser coming to their home is not going to add in any value for that ability. That's like an inside sewer thing. So you're going to have a situation where the person offered to pay, like we know what this happens, offers to pay $300,000 for this townhouse because it can do nightly rentals and they know they can make a boatload of money off of it. It's only going to appraise for $250,000. So now you're just creating issues within the housing market. So now this buyer is like, well, I really want this place, so I'll finance $250,000 and I'll pay you $50,000 cash on the side. So now you just created a situation where that passing on ability is potentially worth $20,000 to $50,000, and it depends on how big it is. The bigger it is, the more valuable that is.
Is there any way around it?
I don't know. I haven't thought through that solution.
I mean, it'd be nice to get around that to allow people to continue, but then that we do have those scenarios where then. And also too, people that are interested in investment properties, they just have, like interest rates don't affect them usually because they have so much cash on hand. And so it's.
It seems to me that the only, like I'm just talking off the top of my head and I would think this through better, but if something is zoned commercial, it seems like if I go and buy it, I should be able to do what I want with it. If it's zoned principally commercial, so yeah, if you were doing nightlies, I should be able to do nightlies because it's a commercial property. But if it's zoned urban residential, which you guys are defining as principal, has been previously defined as principally residential, well, those are the people that are going to be most affected. Because but I own urban residential on the Cliff, that townhouse, right, that green one. So I own one of those and I do nightlies in it, and it makes a lot of money. It's owned urban residential, but when I go to sell that, I can't sell it based on the income I'm creating off of it anyway, because it's going to be a single family home loan. So you're allowing me the ability to pass on this benefit, but it's not how it's getting purchased anyway. So it's like you just made my home more valuable for no real reason.
Yeah, you should make it so that it can't pass on.
or maybe keep
Don't
your
do the
trust or-
non-conform use.
But I'm not proposing that too, because I think if you guys do that, urban residential is 26%, or sorry, 20% of this STRs by zone thing that you guys put out. Urban residential is the one that is most affected by this. I'm telling you, I own an urban residential, but I understand that the value of my place is not determined by the nightly rentals I do now. I'm making money off of it right now because I'm running it that way, but when I sell it, it won't be purchased commercially, right? They're gonna get a residential loan. So I think that if you don't allow the passing on, you're gonna get a lot more people fighting back about this, so I don't know what the right solution is.
Well, some people also wanted, yeah, that's true, because there's some people want, it's generational, they want to be able to pass it to their families or whatever, that kind of
Maybe
thing.
that's a thing that should be allowed.
Yeah, possibly, but.
But then how do you define who's family? So you just create.
Yeah, you just, yeah.
Just use the Alaska hunting regulations.
Sorry, I don't want to take up more time, I just wanted to.
No, and as you can see, it is a predictable kind of thing. It's unpredictable because everybody has a different scenario. And so you're not gonna make everybody happy. You try to get the best possible solution that's gonna benefit maybe the greater part of the people as opposed to individual things. Like I was saying, it is a whack-a-mole kind of thing. You think of this and then there's something else that pops over there that nobody had anticipated. So with that, any commissioners, do you have anything else? Jason, Courtney? Selena? Yep.
So just going back to my personal situation, where, so like for this, the 4-year wait for a commercial district, but it's a multi-family dwelling, is there any specific wording related to a building in a commercial district that's a single-family dwelling and it's resell, like when you said, yes, that ability to sell it, would that allowing it to be nightly rental, is there wording, or does any one of these say that, or is that just understood and how am
It's
I
in,
protected?
so that's in Seward City Code currently, there's a non-conforming use section in code under Title 15. And so, yeah, so when and if this gets approved, anybody that is currently operating a short-term rental in a zone where now, according to code, would not be allowed, their short-term rental would be a non-conforming use. And so then they would.
So it is allowed, it is.
Yeah, so then everything pertaining to your short-term rental would be guided by what is in code for non-conforming uses. And those regulations for non-conforming use are that you can pass it on to another owner. If you cease operation for 1 year, then that non-conforming use has to cease. And then there's some other regulations too about you can't replace, or you can't do more than 50% of repairs on that structure. So if you were, if you had a building with a non-conforming use, if you needed to repair it, if you were going to repair more than 50% of it, then that non-conforming use would have to cease as well. So if you want me to give you in code where the non-conforming uses section is, so you can overlook it, that would be the only guiding rules for short-term rentals that are grandfathered in. We don't use grandfathered is a term for, it's thrown around generally, but it really means a non-conforming use. So that's where you would find it in code.
It's kind of like, maybe to put it this way, it's like, let's say you bought an old home and they changed the building codes. They can't force you to tear down your home and do that. But if you're gonna significantly rebuild your home, then you would have to actually go and conform to the code. But otherwise, we have houses around here that are not up to building code because they're so old, and as long as people don't do a major remodel on them, they get to stay that way. And so
That's the non-conforming.
yeah, that's basically what a non-conforming use is code changes and you get to still stay that way as long as you don't do any major modifications, and you get to carry on in perpetuity. But if you did do major modifications, but anyway, it's similar to having an old house, which I'm sure you know more than you want to.
I'm just confused about the 4-year part, because if you had an old house and you had to update it, you would have to make those changes in electrical and everything, you'd have to get it up to date. So you just bought a house, you bought a house that was a short-term rental or whatever, and now the code doesn't allow for that, that's,
You could still do
you
it.
can't go back to the old house structure, just like you've got to move forward, it's not allowed in that zoning anymore. So, I'm confused about what does the 4 years do? What does that get you? It gets you, you wait 4 years and then you can go back to the old, you can go back to renting it out nightly.
So if a multi-family dwelling was rented out nightly and it was purchased, just automatically switches ownership and continues as nightly rentals.
Oh,
The 4 years only applies if it was being used as long-term rentals
oh.
and then wanted to switch it to short-term rentals.
And in commercial districts.
Yeah.
In commercial district.
Commercial district.
Yeah.
Which are the O farm?
AC, HC, CBD.
But not UR.
Okay,
And-
I
and
think
if
we,
you guys-
a lot of
Yeah,
speculations here.
Right, and- but if you guys think of things like, hey, this would be, have you thought about this before? Or how about this to this solution?
Yeah.
Like, please feel free.
Yeah, call
Like,
the
like, we are-
individual
we're-
things, I think is the best thing to call directly to
Yeah,
Jason and
I have
Drew.
individual answer.
Yeah.
I obviously
Bob?
Yeah, well, I mean, I see what you're doing, but really all it does is pushes the new investors outside the city limits, so you don't really fix the problem. And then the other thing too that bears looking at is Cedar Key, Florida, case that went all the way to the Florida State Supreme Court, and they were trying to, there was 2 residents that actually lived in Cedar Key, it's a very large city. The whole thing is nightly rentals. These people get $350 to $500 a night for each unit. And they took a task, they hired a lawyer, they went all the way to the Florida State Supreme Court, and property rights shall not be infringed, period. And so they lost, the city actually lost in court. So there's, the city sued, loses in court pretty regularly. So if somebody wants to push the issue, the city will probably lose.
They've also, a lot of cities have won it and have completely banned, like South Lake Tahoe got rid of them completely, and they just shut them entirely down and they won in court. So it's like, it depends on how, like, we have done plenty of work, lots of research going both ways and stuff.
But the key thing here is it pushes it outside the city limits. So if they want to invest, they're going to invest. And I have one client, she bought a 5-bedroom house, actually more or less duplexes, but that's what she's doing.
Yeah.
Previous owners did the same thing, they lived in it, she
Yeah.
lives in it in the summer. She will live in it in the future, but she's basically expanding the property so she's not losing revenue.
Yeah.
So,
And I think the problem's already outside of city limits, like in my house, like I've had, there used to be none, and now there's like 3 around me. So, and it's, you know, so I think it's already there whether we like it or not, so.
and then some of the complaints are, you know, rowdy parties and things like that that go on, and frankly, I don't really see that as much of an issue because that one's gonna be gone. Whereas if the Buffas move in next door with their 97 dogs and their naughty kids and, you know, the junk cars and all that stuff, I mean, that's happening too.
Yeah.
Those are harder to get rid of. Some real nice residential properties out in Meridian Park, you know, there's a big auto shop there now, and a bunch of junk cars sitting around, you know, things like that. So
Yeah.
it kind of keeps that.
The
Those
other,
things happen, but,
yeah,
you know, the borough got a big chunk of ground from the state on Nash Road that they had done absolutely nothing with since 1987. And it's a big piece of property. And it could have been developed a long time ago to get people up out of the floodplain and providing more housing, but it's still just sitting there. The borough's doing nothing with it. They've never done anything.
yeah, we're trying to push them in that direction. I live on Nash Road, I know which piece of property you're talking
Yeah,
about, so.
and then the other one that would be a development, I think it's being looked at too, is behind Andy's house there. Anderson's on Nash Road. The lower bench of Mount Alice is a easily accessible, developable. But, you know, most of that's gonna be high-end property, and, you know, when your lot start at 100,000, your entry-level people aren't gonna be doing that stuff.
Right.
Okay, if we have any more on the code stuff, I know we're getting into specifics here, so we probably should just move on with that as far as the rest of the code. Do we have anything more to add from administration? Anything else from the commissioners? I mean, if anybody has specifics to go to community development, Jason and Courtney and Selena are more than willing and able to help you guys answer any specific questions on that, so. Okay, well, with that, then we'll go ahead and just close out the work session. Thank you, everybody.
Great, thank you.
Thanks so much.